In September 2020, two of the most famous people on the planet sat down and signed a deal that the entertainment industry described, without hyperbole, as one of the most significant content agreements in the history of streaming. Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, had just stepped back from royal duties, moved to California, and aligned themselves with a platform that was, at that specific moment in time, at the absolute peak of its global cultural power. Netflix, the rep, hoarded value of the deal, $100 million across multiple years. The promise, a production company, Archewell Productions, that would create films and series and documentaries for all ages, built on the couple's stated mission to use storytelling to embrace shared humanity and a duty to truth. The world, or at least a very large part of it, was watching. The opportunity was extraordinary. The money was extraordinary. And the platform was hungry for exactly the kind of recognizable, global, culturally loaded names that Harry and Meghan represent in the autumn of 2020. In March 2026, CNN confirmed that Meghan's lifestyle brand As Ever and Netflix had officially parted ways. That same month, Variety published a deep investigation, speaking to 6 well-placed individuals with knowledge of both Netflix and the Sussexes, and described a relationship that had been, in the magazine's precise language, far from a fairy tale. One insider, speaking anonymously about the internal mood at Netflix toward the Sussex partnership, offered a summary that required no further analysis. The mood in the building, this person said, is where he done. The distance between those two moments, the $100 million deal and the building that was done, is approximately 18 months of documented, verifiable, step-by-step decline. And it is a story worth telling carefully, because when you strip away the tabloid noise and examine what actually happened, what the streaming data actually shows, what the industry sources actually said, and what the palace figures adjacent to this story were saying long before the numbers confirmed it, what you find is something more interesting than a simple failure narrative. You find a story about the limits of a single story, and what happens when his story runs out before the business plan does. Start with the foundation, because the foundation was genuinely impressive. The Harry and Meghan docu-series, released in 2 parts in December 2022, is still, as of mid-2026, the most watched documentary debut in Netflix's history in terms of viewing time in its opening week. Those are not disputed numbers. The series generated 16.6 million views between 2023 and 2025 alone, years after its original release. As recently as the first half of 2025, it accumulated 7.3 million hours of viewing time, an audience for a 3-year-old documentary that most content creators would envy. What the docu-series proved was something Netflix's then CEO Ted Sarandos had spotted early. When people watched Meghan and Harry tell their story, they kept watching. Sarandos told Variety in one of his more candid moments that when the trailer for the Harry and Meghan series dropped, everything on screen was dissected in the press for days. The shoes she was wearing sold out all over the world. The Hermes blanket on the chair behind her sold out everywhere in the world. This was audience engagement at a level that most content on any platform never approaches. And it was real. But here is the thing that the numbers also reveal when you look at them honestly and in sequence. The docuseries, arced because it was built on something specific, irreplaceable, and by its nature finite. The story of Harry and Meghan's departure from the royal family. That story had never been told before in that format, with that level of personal access, with that emotional intensity from the people at the center of it. The audience that watched it was in a significant art, an audience that had been following the royal family for decades, that had opinions about Diana, that remembered the 2020 announcement, that had watched the Oprah interview, that wanted to see the full picture from Harry and Meghan's own mouth in their own home. That specific audience, for that specific story, was enormous. It was also, by definition, an audience that could only experience that story for the first time once. And what the subsequent 2.5 years of content from Archewell would reveal, with painful clarity across the streaming data, was that the audience for that particular story the first time was not the same as the audience for every subsequent attempt to extend, elaborate, or repurpose IT. The first signal came from the most understated source possible, a docuseries called Live to Lead, released on the last day of 2022, examining extraordinary leaders of our time. It was produced in association with Archewell Productions and the Nelson Mandela Foundation. It was, by any reasonable assessment, a good faith piece of documentary filmmaking. It also had 700,000 views in the first half of 2023, 100,000 in the second half, and by early 2024 had fallen below Netflix, X's minimum qualifying threshold for its own engagement reports, meaning it was watched fewer than 100,000 times in a 6-month period. The gap between those numbers and the 16.6 million views of the Harry and Meghan docuseries tells you everything about the nature of what audiences had actually bought into. They had bought into Harry and Meghan, not into Harry and Meghan presenting other people's stories. Heart of Invictus, the docuseries following. Athletes competing in Harry's Invictus Games for Wounded Veterans, released in 2023, similarly failed to generate the numbers that would have justified a significant ongoing commitment from Netflix to this kind of content. It was a genuinely compelling premise. Real athletes, real stories of recovery and resilience, a cause that even the most strident Sussex critics had never seriously questioned. But in Netflix's competitive environment, where every piece of content is measured against the billions of hours of viewing time available on the platform, it failed to pull meaningful numbers. Polo, a 5-episode unscripted series released in 2024 about Harry's friend and polo athlete Nacho Figueras, according to Deadline, similarly failed to pull up many trees. Netflix's own chief content officer, Bella Bajaria, said in February 2024, in an assessment that was both remarkably candid and genuinely blunt about the creative challenge. There's no juicy story there. That phrase deserves to sit for a moment. The chief content officer of the platform that had paid up to $100 million for the Sussex's content, describing the problem with their content in 5 words. No juicy story. What Bajaria was identifying was not a quality issue or a competence issue. She was identifying a structural problem inherent to the content model from the beginning. The Sussex story, as a content category, was essentially a sing. The story, their departure from royal life, the reasons for it, and the emotional aftermath. The docuseries told that story as comprehensively and personally as it could be told. Every subsequent project was, whether intentionally or not, measured against that story, and found to offer something smaller, something more predictable, something that lacked the irreplaceable quality of first disclosure. The audience that had shown up for the revelation wasn't returning in the same numbers for the continuation. While the content challenges were building, something else was happening in parallel. Meghan was attempting to construct a commercial identity that existed independently of the royal departure story. In March 2024, she launched an Instagram account and announced a lifestyle brand called American Riviera Orchard. The reveal was carefully choreographed, a short video showing Meghan arranging flowers, baking in a kitchen, walking through a garden in a floor-length gown. The aesthetic was deliberately aspirational, warm-toned, domestic, the visual language of the premium lifestyle category that has been lucrative territory for celebrity brands across 2 decades of social media commerce. Company registration documents revealed plans to sell tableware, cutlery, cookbooks, stationery, party decorations, jams, preserves, and of other items. In April 2024, Meghan sent strawberry jam samples to approximately 50 people, including her friend Chrissy Teigen, in what was clearly designed as a soft launch publicity moment. What followed, over the next several months, was a cascade of setbacks that seemed individually minor, but that together told a very consistent story. The trademark application for American Riviera Orchard was questioned by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office over the logo design in October 2024. A separate trademark protest emerged from an Oregon company over the branding. Multiple reports noted that no CEO had been found to actually run the business. The Cut asked, in a headline that captured the exasperation of anyone tracking the brand's development, "So when will Meghan Markle actually start selling jam?" In December 2024, reports described Meghan as having made the bold decision to continue without a dedicated CEO after struggling to find one. No products were ever actually sold under the American Riviera Orchard name. Then, in February 2025, Meghan announced the brand was being renamed. American Riviera Orchard was becoming as ever. She explained in a statement on her Instagram account that the original name had limited her because it connected the brand too specifically to one geographic area. The rename came 2 weeks before the launch of her Netflix lifestyle series With Love, Meghan, and was accompanied by the announcement that Netflix was joining not only as the show's platform but as an equity partner in the As Ever business, a decision that, in hindsight, represents the peak moment of the 2 parties' commercial ambition with each other, occurring just weeks before the relationship began its final deterioration. With Love, Meghan launched its first season on Netflix in March 2025. The show's premise was built around Meghan cooking, entertaining, and crafting with celebrity friends, a format that has worked well for numerous lifestyle personalities across multiple platforms. The critical reception was not kind. Vulture's review described it as an utterly deranged, bizarro world voyage into the center of nothing, a fantastical minute, meant to the captivating power of watching one woman decorate a cake with her makeup artist while communicating solely through throw pillow adages about joy and hospitality. The review, while obviously savage in its framing, was not an outlier. It captured a broader critical consensus that the show was struggling to find a genuine tone, caught between the aspirational lifestyle register it was trying to inhabit and the unavoidable celebrity of its host, whose every public move was read through a layer of royal family context that the show itself was trying to set aside. Two specific criticisms circulated widely and stuck: that the show has not filmed in Meghan's actual kitchen, and that one episode featured Meghan presenting Trader Joe's peanut butter pretzels, repackaged in plastic bags in a way that suggested they were homemade. Both criticisms were specific, visual, and impossible to unsee once pointed out. Season 2 launched August 26, 2025. The numbers were, by any measure, catastrophic for a show with this level of celebrity investment. Deadline, citing Netflix's own What We Watched data release, reported that, with love, Meghan was viewed only 2 million times across the entire second half of Tudor 25. That made it the 1,217th most watched title on the platform during that period. The holiday special released in December 2025 failed to make the top 1,000 shows on Netflix for the year. Netflix confirmed there would be no full third season. The show would continue, if at all, only as occasional seasonal specials. The as-ever business itself was generating its own complications for Netflix by this point. Variety's investigation, based on 6 sources with direct knowledge, reported that by late 2025, Netflix was sitting on more than $10 million of surplus as-ever inventory. Teas, baking mixes, and other products that had not moved through the commercial channels the partnership had envisioned. The excess stock was significant enough that Netflix began distributing it to its own employees for free, setting products on card tables in various office buildings. An Archewell spokesperson described this as standard practice for studio sample closets. The description did not entirely square with the scale of the reported inventory. In August 2025, Netflix announced what it describing D as an extension of the relationship, restructuring the overall output deal with Archewell into a first-look arrangement. The language was corporate diplomatic, but the practical reality of what had changed was significant. An overall deal, which was the original structure of the Netflix partnership, means the platform funds development across the board, taking a broad-based financial risk on a production company's output pipeline. A first-look deal means Netflix gets to see what the company develops and can choose whether to buy it, but is not committed to funding a sustained slate of content. The downgrade was the stream-in, G equivalent of a landlord converting a long-term lease into a month-to-month arrangement. Both parties insisted it was a positive development. The industry read it as precisely what it appeared to be. Then came March 2026. Netflix and As Ever ended their equity partnership. CNN confirmed the separation on March 6th. Meghan's spokesperson suggests the split was part of a natural progression in which Meghan would exercise more independent control over the brand going forward. The Netflix spokesperson, Bella Baharia, was diplomatica, lie positive, telling Variety that Archewell had been a thoughtful and collaborative partner. But Variety's 6 sources told a different story, one of sustained internal frustration with the commercial performance of the Sussex content, of Netflix sitting on surplus inventory, of a creative team that had been unable to develop up the scripted pipeline the original deal envisioned, and of an audience whose appetite for Sussex content had diminished far more dramatically than either party had anticipated when the $100 million deal was signed in 2020. The insider who summarized the internal mood most bluntly used a phrase so concise it needed no elaboration. We're done. Now let's address the palace new element of this story, because it's the part that deserves the most careful treatment and the most honest framing. Was there a palace figure who sat in a meeting room in 2020 and said, with specific prophetic clarity, exactly how and when this would unfold? No documented evidence. C supports that specific claim. What is documented across multiple sources in multiple years is something considerably more interesting. A consistent, on-record assessment from royal commentators, media analysts, and PA. The Sussexes were building had a fundamental structural vulnerability baked into it from the beginning. Tom Bauer, in his March 2026 book Betrayal, described the Sussexes' approach to their independent commercial life as built on selling repackaged versions of the same story, language that published years after it was privately predicted by people watching the situation from inside the institution. Amanda Platell, writing in the Daily Mail during the peak of the Sussex content era, described them as having monetized their royal connection until there was nothing left to monetize. A phrase that, in light of the Netflix data, reads less like an opinion and more like a documented outcome. The structural problem that these observers identified, and that the streaming numbers subsequently confirmed, is this. Harry and Meghan's commercial value to a streaming platform was built almost entirely on their royal identity, their past inside the institution, their departure from it, and the emotional and political drama surrounding that departure. That identity was not something they could replenish or replace. It was fixed at the moment they left, which meant that every piece of content that used it was, in a quantifiable sense, depleting a finite resource. The docuseries used a great deal of it. Spare the memoir used more. The subsequent podcast, the follow-up shows, the lifestyle brand lay, hunched against the backdrop of ongoing royal family tension. Each one drew on the same reservoir, and each one drew on a reservoir that could not be refilled because the events that filled it happened only once. And this is where the palace's silence on all of it, maintained consistently from 2020 until now, begins to look less like passivity and more like a form of patience. Multiple palace sources in the years since Megxit have declined to engage publicly with each Sussex revelation, each Netflix release, each commercial launch. That silence was not ignorance. It was, by the assessment of multiple royal commentators who observed it closely over years, a strategy built on a specific understanding of how content ecosystems work over time. The palace's long-standing communications advisors, whose institutional memory spans decades of managing oil narratives through media cycles far shorter than the current one, understood something that Netflix may not have fully priced into its $100 million valuation: that the audience for revelations about the royal family has a shelf life, and that once the primary revelation has been made and processed, the subsequent audience for related content declines with a speed that the celebrity economy's normal metrics don't fully capture. Where does all of this leave the empire as of mid-2026? As Ever continues as a brand under Meghan's independent control, with products including jam, raspberry jam, tea, and rosé wine listed on its website. The full-scale rollout and CEO-led expansion that the original American Riviera Orchard vision promised has not materialized. The Netflix first look deal remains in place with Nyawine. H2 projects reportedly in various stages of development. An adaptation of Carly Fortune's novel Meet Me at the Lake, which Archwell optioned and which Netflix was to develop as a film, and The Wedding Date, another feature adaptation. Whether either project goes into production, and whether it reaches audience, as in any form that recaptures the cultural moment of 2022, are questions that the available evidence suggests should be approached with realistic expectations. What has happened between September 2020 and mid-2026 is not, when examined honestly and in detail, a story of personal failure or moral collapse. It is a story of a commercial strategy that bet everything on a single story and discovered, over 18 months of accumulating streaming data, that the audience for that story had a ceiling, and that when you reach the ceiling, here is no obvious direction to go, except the one that requires rebuilding from the ground up, with a clearer understanding of what you're actually selling and to whom, independent of the royal context that made the first chapter so extraordinarily successful. That rebuild is, by all available evidence, what Meghan is now attempting with As Ever on her own terms, whether it works without the Netflix equity partnership, without the $100 million deal structure, and without the royal departure story. Is the engine driving audience interest? Is the question that the next chapter of this story will answer. The palace, as always, is not commenting. It doesn't need to. The streaming data has already said everything the institution might otherwise have said. Quietly conclusive, lie, and in numbers that require no press release to make their meaning absolutely clear. There is one more layer of this story that deserves examination, and it involves the specific creative and commercial decisions that contributed to the decline, because understanding them matters if we're going to tell this honestly rather than simply as a series of bad headlines. The Spotify deal is the earliest and perhaps most instructive case study, signed alongside the Netflix deal in 2020 and reported to be worth approximately $20 million Spotify partnership produced Meghan's podcast Archetypes, in which she interviewed high-profile women about the label society puts on them. The show had genuine moments of compelling conversation. An interview with Mariah Carey generated significant press attention, and the conversations with tennis player Serena Williams and actress Issa Rae were warmly received by audiences who found them. But Archetypes ran for only one season. In 2023, the Spotify deal ended. Reports attributed the end to the couple having failed to meet productivity benchmarks, which is Spotify's contractually gentle way of saying that the volume and type of content produced did not match what the platform needed to justify a $20 million investment. Meghan subsequently moved the podcast to a smaller platform, Lemonada Media. No second season followed. The Spotify chapter, when closed, had produced roughly 12 episodes of Audio Co., intent from a deal worth $20 million. The pattern of the Spotify failure would repeat itself with variations across the Netflix relationship, not because of malice or incompetence, but because of a creative bottleneck that either party appears to have fully anticipated or resolved. The bottleneck was this: Meghan and Harry, as content creators, had one primary and uniquely valuable story to tell. Once they had told T in the most direct and complete form available to them, the docuseries, every subsequent project faced the challenge of being either a reprise of that story, which the data shows audiences had limited appetite for, or an entirely new story that didn't rely on the Sussex royal ident. IT, which turned out to be considerably harder to develop and considerably less commercially compelling. The Sundance Film Festival Moment docu, minted by Variety, is perhaps the most vivid illustration of this bottleneck in practice. At the January 2024 festival, Archewell's new creative team arrived with backing from Netflix to pursue acquisitions, to buy independently developed projects that Archewell could then develop further. 4 sources told Variety that sales agents and filmmakers on the ground were not interested in any Archewell involvement. The company expressed specific interest in 2 high-profile documentary projects, Skywalkers, a love story about daredevil urban climbers, and Superman, the Christopher Reeve story, a documentary about the beloved AC, Thor and his life after his paralyzing accident. Neither deal materialized. The Christopher Reeve documentary went to Warner Brothers for $15 million, less than what Archewell would have offered. And 3 sources told Variety thus that the filmmakers preferred Warner Brothers, regardless of price. The signal from the independent film community was clear. Association with Archewell in the 2024 independent film market was not something filmmakers were actively seeking. This is the gap between the headline value of the Sussex brand and its practical, commercial utility in the content industry. A gap that grew wider with each successive project that underperformed, because reputation in the content business is cumulative in both directions. A string of successful projects builds an aura that attracts future projects. A string of underperforming ones builds a reputation that causes filmmakers and sales agents to quietly, politely find other homes for work they care about. By mid-2025, with the Netflix deal downgraded and the as-ever inventory sitting in Netflix office buildings being distributed to employees for free, that cumulative reputational question is being actively discussed in industry circles in terms that would have been unthinkable in 2020. What made the situation particularly difficult to course correct was the narrowness of the original bet. The entire Sussex content strategy, the docuseries, the memoir, the podcast, the lifestyle show, the charity events filmed for documentary series was built on a single underlying assumption, that being Harry and Meghan, specifically, was a sufficient content proposition in itself. That the Sussex identity, royal, famous, controversial, sympathetic to some and infuriating to others, would translate directly into sustained audience engagement across multiple formats in multiple years. That assumption proved to be accurate for the first project built on it, and significantly less accurate for each one that followed. The lifestyle brand, in this context, was an attempt to step outside the royal story and build something new. A celebrity business model that didn't depend on ongoing royal family drama to drive its commercial engine. It was, in principle, a sound strategic instinct. Celebrity lifestyle brands have been enormously successful, for figures whose fame was built in entirely different contexts, in music and film and athletics. But those brands succeed when they are built on something the celebrity actually represents to their core audience, an aesthetic sensibility, a specific expertise, a personal philosophy that their existing audience already has in and wants access to. The challenge for Meghan's brand is that her largest and most passionate audience, the one that has followed her story most closely for the past 6 years, is an audience primarily interested in the royal family story. The degree to which that audience is also an audience for artisan jam, hand-poured candles, and lifestyle television built around entertaining guests in a Montecito kitchen is a question the viewing data for With Love, Meghan has now aired with considerable specificity. None of this means the story is over, as ever exists, has products on the market, and could grow into something sustainable without Netflix's equity backing. It said nothing at all and let the numbers speak